The next speaker in the program is Mr. Aaron Lawton, Director of Operations of One Ocean Expeditions, as he's going to be talking on Arctic marine tourism.
Nice. Button here, laser pointer, and left, right. If you get one of these, it'll black out.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm, as stated, the Director of Operations with One Ocean Expeditions. We're an expedition cruise company based in Canada, operating in the Antarctic, in Svalbard, in Greenland, and in the Canadian Arctic at this point. But I'm also here on behalf of IACO, the Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators. And IACO is a member association that covers most of the expedition cruise operators operating in the circumpolar Arctic. So my presentation is more on the generic Arctic expedition cruise industry and less on an infomercial on One Ocean. You can get me talking about that later. I'll take a global approach and start off with just the passenger capacity snapshot of the global cruise industry, not just the Arctic, but this is the global cruise industry. In 2017, an expectation of about 25.5 million cruisers around the world. This is a big industry we're talking about, and these folks are coming from around the world. In 2015, about half of those cruisers came from the United States. The UK, Germany, Australia, and increasingly China have seen increases in this cruise industry as well in the market. So cruises are coming from around the world, and it is a big industry, and it's only going to get larger. But taking it into the region, into the high Arctic, and I will just turn and face the screen for a moment, otherwise I'll miss some of these arrows. We're looking at the cruise patterns for the circumpolar Arctic. The green arrows show the more conventional cruise industry, and the yellow arrows show the expedition cruise industry. The conventional cruise industry at the moment is focused around the coast of Norway up towards Longyearbyen or Svalbard, around Iceland, and there's a smaller portion of that conventional cruise industry on the west coast of Greenland, where there's a little more ice-free water. The expedition cruise industry also spends a lot of time up in the Svalbard area. You see this arrow going up into the ice. There's that the nuclear icebreaker North Pole trips going from through Franz Josef Land up to the North Pole, and then up around the east coast of Greenland, a very isolated part of the world, up into the west coast of Greenland, the Canadian Arctic, and through the Northwest Passage. I'm going to leave the Alaska cruise industry and inside passage cruise industry off the table in this discussion. We don't see the green arrow yet going through the Northwest Passage. The Crystal Serenity, just one transit, doesn't quite rate a green arrow yet. So here we've got a graph just showing the cruise passengers in the Arctic. Global cruise passengers or conventional and expedition cruise passengers visiting the Arctic and the various regions of the Arctic over the last decade or so. And what you can see from this graph, you can see the blue lines indicate the Svalbard, the red is Greenland, and a very small portion of the cruise industry is in the Canadian Arctic and in Russia. I hate to say it, and any Canadians in the room, please plug your ears for a second, but in Canada and Russia, we seem to be overburdened by regulations in the cruise industry. So that is a bit of a barrier of entry for many of the companies operating in Svalbard and Greenland. I hate to compare the two countries, but... And just to show the trends in some of the regions, we see this again is not just expedition cruises, this is conventional cruises as well. This is Norway, and you see that growth curve for Norway. You see it a little differently for Iceland, and by region in Iceland, each of these represents a region, a cruise region of Iceland. But again, you see the increasing trend in cruise tourism. So this industry is here to stay, and it's going to grow, and as it grows, there's going to be a demand for new areas. And and new vessels. This information is from CLIA, the Cruise Line International Association. The new ships on order, quite a staggering quantity, 97 ships on order over the next 10 years, 26 this year on order. They might not all get delivered, but that's an incredible capacity, cruise capacity being brought to the industry. I've dropped the term conventional cruise a few times now, and I should perhaps explain it. This is what I would consider a conventional cruise ship. It's a large ship. Passenger numbers, what I would say is greater than, the line I draw is greater than 500, and it goes up into the thousands. The crew on these ships go up into the thousands from time to time. These ships are large in passenger numbers, large in size, multi-story ships. For their size, they're incredible ships. They're incredibly maneuverable. But for some of the waterways, the Arctic waterways, they're just incredibly large ships. And a bit of a concern to see a ship that size going through a strait. Someone mentioned Bellot Strait earlier. These are big ships. Generally conventional hulls, so not ice-strengthened hulls. And with limited experience on the bridge dealing in ice-covered waters. Over the last few years, we've seen a few of these ships coming down into the Antarctic, and where they don't have the expertise on their bridge team, they're bringing in some very experienced ice captains. These ships have very set itineraries, and marketing, sales and marketing, I'm the operations guy, and sales and marketing's hitting me every day for sail plans for the next year, the year after. These big cruise ships are booked 2, 3, 4 years out. Their port calls are planned, their service calls are planned. Their itineraries are pretty fixed, and when you're planning that far out, you aren't really able to deal with the variability of seasonal ice or weather issues, heavier weather issues, weather years down in the Antarctic or in the Drake Passage. So I'm going to contrast that with the expedition cruise vessels, and you can see my bias here, one picture of the conventional ship and a dozen pictures or more, 16 pictures of expedition cruise ships. But really we're talking about a whole different kettle of fish, from sailboats and yachts, sailing ships, old converted light vessels. We've got from about 12 plus passengers up to about 350 to 500 stretching it for an expedition ship. And you see all range of ships in here. What do they have in common? Generally, most of them are ice strengthened. They've got very experienced officers, captains who have a lot of experience in the polar regions. Some of these ships and some of the captains sailing on these ships at the moment in our industry have 20 plus years on their ships in the polar regions. They get addicted to it and they keep coming back. These are smaller ships, very capable ships, seaworthy, ice-strengthened hulls. The standard in the industry would be a Canadian, probably a Canadian Type C. There are a few Type A and Type B ships, and we've had a new breed of ships coming in that are about a Type E in the Canadian system. But they've all got some ice strengthening. I think one of the things that makes them stand out as well is the flexibility of itinerary planning. Expedition cruise operators have been burned a few times planning schedules too tightly. And where we operate on the fringes, we've learned to add in time. And so building an itinerary 2 years out, you add an extra day to cross Baffin Bay from Greenland to Pond Inlet, to the northern end of Baffin Island, just in case the Baffin Bay middle ice reappears and we don't have to sail up to Cap York and go around that ice. My first few years in the industry, around I guess 1999, 2000, we were sailing up to it seemed like we were sailing almost to Thule to get around the ice to get down into Pond Inlet, and added an extra full day at sea. We still build that day into our sail plan, and as the time gets closer, now I'm looking at ships heading up into the Arctic this week. It's on the coast of Labrador, heading north. Now I'm rewriting schedules I've realized the middle ice is not going to be there, and I've known it all along, but now I can add in a little bonus day for passengers, and that flexibility is something that really sets the expedition cruise industry apart. So I showed that growth in the cruise industry, and that growth is there in the global cruise industry, but also in the expedition cruise industry. And over the last few months, my head's been spinning as I've seen companies going to market with new vessels on order, 15 to 20 polar class vessels on order over the next probably next decade from our industry. And it's interesting; they're not just conventional vessels; these are polar class, so ice-strengthened vessels to varying degrees, but there's all kinds of new ideas. The X-bow design that has worked well on offshore supply vessels is being bandied around. But we also have new activities coming into play with ships traveling into these regions with submersibles, more of the ships with helicopters and other water toys, jet skis, jet boats. That's what we're seeing as these new announcements are made. So we're seeing a growth in the industry, an increase in also an increase in the size of the ship. A little bigger ships, a little more luxurious, and another 50, 100 passengers. I started, I guess, in the Antarctic in 98, 97. And I was on one of the biggest ships in the Antarctic cruise industry then at 100 passengers. I'm almost embarrassed to say I'm still on the same ship when I go to sea, and I love it. It's a beautiful ship, and it's 100 passengers, but now it's the smallest, or just about the smallest ship in the industry. And the normal size is 150 to 220 passengers. So there's been growth and change in the industry. The last point with this new capacity, of course, is new itineraries. We're tripping over each other, and we need to push the boundaries and find places to go. But getting around Svalbard, there's a lot of ships up around Svalbard, and we're pushing north to 82 degrees to the ice edge as the polar pack recedes. That, for those who know the Arctic satellite issues, that puts us pretty limited bandwidth for communication, and there's not much help up there. In the Canadian Arctic, we're looking west, we're looking north, we're looking up between Ellesmere and Greenland and Duquesne Basin, looking for new itineraries to stay out of the way of each other. And we take our time doing it, but there is that, as the ice diminishes, we'll be pushing a little farther. So I said I was here to speak on IACO's behalf as well, and One Ocean Expeditions is a proud member of the Association of Arctic Expedition Cruise Operators, or IACO, and we're a member organization founded in 2003 by the members of the industry, and our goal is to ensure environmentally friendly, safe, and considerate tourism. Of course, we're a trade association, so we advocate for the industry and the members' interests as well with the various national authorities in the regions we travel. We've got about 60 international members at the moment, 36 cruise operators or vessel managers, and operating about 40 vessels in around the Arctic. And I think at this point, it might be every expedition cruise company operating in the circumpolar Arctic is a member. It might be one outstanding still that we're working on. So that is really good coverage for us. We're proud of that. Our passengers numbers have been increasing, and you see a steady trend. Well, not much of a trend, I guess, if you're a scientist. If you're trying to convince your marketing team, then it's I call that a clear trend. And but what I see over the next couple of years is even more interesting, and going from about 20,000 in 2016 up to expected to be around 24,000 this year in our association, and up to close to 33,000 in 2019. That's our progression, our expected progression of numbers over the next couple of years. So the growth is happening. There'll be more people coming into the region, which will, I think we'll see some challenges, infrastructure challenges and others as we work up into the north. And this is for Svalbard, Greenland, Jan Mayen, the Canadian Arctic, and in the Russian Arctic, it's mainly Franz Josef Land, the new Russian Arctic National Park. Just a few initiatives led by IACO, and as an association, IACO works with its members to develop operational guidelines. So if you're becoming a member, you apply to become a member, and you have to prove that you can follow or will follow these guidelines, show that you'll follow them. And that's for how to operate tours. So we're trying to we'll teach people how to compete with us. And as long as they do it the right way, then we'll welcome them with open arms. But also visitor guidelines. We'll also teach our passengers how they're supposed to interact when they come up into the region. We do it in the Antarctic as well with the Antarctic Association, but we've got a set of animated guidelines, which seems to be a hit, that's available in about 20 languages now that we can show to our passengers on the ship. Also, wildlife guidelines, how to interact around walrus in rubber inflatable zodiacs. Most of our passengers are nervous about polar bears when we're in the Arctic. Most of our boat drivers are nervous about walrus. How do you interact around walrus? And any walrus hunter will know why I say that. Biosecurity guidelines, prevention of the introduction of non-native species. Any photographers in the room? There's got to be a few of you. I saw a couple at the back of the room. You bring a tripod up into the Arctic, and we're going to make you biosecure that tripod, the feet of the tripod, your trekking poles. We'll clean those with a biocide before you bring whatever was in your farmyard at home up into the Arctic. We'll vacuum out your pockets on your jackets before you come ashore. We'll actually make you vacuum out your pockets, and you'll pay a lot of money to use our vacuum to do it when you get up into the region. But it's teaching people about the responsibilities they have. And then site-specific guidelines. There are a lot of sites we visit in the Arctic that are very sensitive, and as some of the sites see hundreds of, even thousands of passengers a summer, and so we work with the local authorities to develop guidelines for the sites. In Svalbard, we have 20 different I think it's about 26 now, different site-specific guidelines that we've put together. We've gotten approval from the Svalbard Governor's Office. And that's mandatory for all our ships going in there. So I know that if I visit that site, here's how I'm going to behave, and every other ship that's a member of our organization will behave the same way. So we set uniform standards. And then visiting communities, we're visiting communities that are very small, very isolated. And some of the ships coming into those communities more than double the population of a community. It's even more staggering with the big ships coming in. And so guidelines on how to interact with the communities, as well as community-specific guidelines, a template for the communities to develop guidelines how they want the ship to interact with them. So we provide the template to them, they fill it out, send it back to the ships visiting their community, and we follow those requests. Maritime safety, of course, is important to our industry. So important, I spelled maritime wrong. I'm sorry for that. But something was going to get missed. Our vessels all have trackers on it, and I can log into my computer anytime and see where the entire industry, all the ships are. I get a message from my captain saying, we're having a bit of a problem here. I know within about 5 minutes which ship is closest, and I've spoken to my counterpart at that company saying, hey, before you move out of that area, can you give me a buzz? I'll just let you know if we've got our problem rectified here. Crowdsourcing of hydrographic data or sounding data. We use the OLEX crowdsourcing software. It's not perfect. It's not a replacement for hydrographic survey, but it offers our navigators a second line of information. We've been working with the IHO and identifying areas of importance for new soundings, as well as providing the data from our ships, from our ACTIS systems, as we after the season. We've got a cruise database that all the companies can access, so we know where the other ships are, what their plans are, but also a cruise ship database, which is available to the SAR authorities, to the Joint Rescue Coordination Centers, MRCCs, that tells them what capabilities exist on each ship, how many fast rescue boats, what kind of first aid, how many doctors on the ship, how many nurses, what kind of burn equipment do we have. All of that stuff is in that cruise ship database, and that's cataloged by IACO and then provided to the MRCCs on request. The MRCCs are also given the access to the vessel tracking system. We've been quite involved in search and rescue. It's been mentioned today already a few times, but we've most recently been involved in Iceland. The Icelandic Coast Guard has hosted two joint search and rescue tabletop exercises in conjunction with IACO. And that's been exciting to have most of the search and rescue authorities, competent authorities around the Arctic in the room with most of the fleet superintendents and a lot of the captains sitting around a table, and the questions flying out. And the first year we did that, it was about the 8th simulated hour of the exercise before one of the response ships turned and asked the industry, the cruise ships, hey, does anybody have a helicopter on board? Or can anybody land a helicopter? And it was 2 hours later before that same guy turned and asked, hey, do you have fuel for helicopters? If you can't, can you refuel one of our helicopters? And it was amazing. The second year, of course, we did that. The second year, immediately, who's got a helicopter and how much fuel do you have on board? And so the industry learns what the response times are. The responding authorities learn what our capabilities are. And this year, the Canadian Coast Guard hosted a Northwest Passage tabletop exercise where we worked quite closely with the Coast Guard, both IACO and us in One Ocean, to run this exercise. And again, a learning experience for both sides. The industry as a whole does a lot to support scientists. We will carry scientists on the ships. We'll offer berths. Some of the companies, ours included, will have berths provided. We helped sponsor the Arctic Net Conference a couple of years ago in Canada, with the hope of being able to connect to Canadian scientists. We're a Canadian company, to Canadian scientists, saying, we had a big flag at our table saying we have 2 berths on every trip dedicated for scientists. We didn't have any Canadian scientists take us up on it that year. But there's the support of real science, and then there's the support of citizen science, and there is a difference between the two. I think both are valid, but the whale sightings catalogs and so on is valuable, and it's something that the passengers can help with, and the passengers can pore over photographs and look to identify specific whales, and so that's some of the work we do on the ships. It's reporting marine mammal sightings to various organizations, and I will say that IACO has come out in support of an international heavy fuel oil ban in the Arctic. So I'm going to wrap it here, just with the last few comments being that the industry is growing. I think we're working well with authorities in the various regions we travel. We would love to see better charts, better hydrographic data. We'd love someone to figure out satellite communications over 75 degrees north. We'll pay for it. Our passengers will pay for it. We just need someone to launch the satellites. And this year we had an issue with the Norwegian's ice service was not producing ice charts on Saturdays and Sundays. So our entire industry in Svalbard, which is the majority of the industry, was running out of data Friday afternoon about 4 o'clock, and we had nothing until Monday. And this year, the Norwegian Ice Service responded, and they produce images for us over the weekend to improve navigational safety. So we're working well with the authorities. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much, Aaron. We have a problem. We don't have much time, so we'll have to eat into Brad Moran's talk, because you have a number of really good questions. So I'm going to try to, please answer as fast as you can and concise. First one, does IACO encourage all of its members to ensure that its ships participate in the WMO voluntary observations from ships, the BOS plus?
Yes, IACO does encourage the ships to participate in the World Meteorological.
Okay, it's a landing ground. Okay.
Yeah.
What contingencies do IACO members build in for vessel emergencies in such remote environments? A mass rescue would be incredibly complex in the polar regions.
I can't answer that one in a short time, but I will say that we've worked with the authorities of all the MRCCs around the Arctic all of them have been very involved in working with IACO on these tabletop exercises, so that putting that time in around the table with the authorities from the various countries, learning their response times, that's allowed the members to well, I guess it's helped us improve our readiness, our contingency plans.
Thanks. Do you expect the greatest increase in tourism to come from Asian countries like China?
There's a dramatic growth in cruise passengers globally from China. I think that will be a strong market for our industry.
I'm going to jump a couple. How many trips did the Crystal Serenity make this past year? But the most important part, what is the forecast for passenger ships to sail through the Northwest Passage for the next year?
The Crystal Serenity made one transit of the Northwest Passage last year, and they did an incredible job of it. They set the gold standard for large ships in the Canadian Arctic. I think both the U.S. Coast Guard and the Canadian Coast Guard would agree with that statement. They have a transit planned for this year through the Northwest Passage. Another company had planned, went to market with a Northwest Passage transit, pulled it after about 6 weeks, and I think it was to sort of test the market. I'm not sure how many transits are planned this year. I think my ships are doing 4.
Thank you, Aaron, for your contribution.
Thank you.